Welcome to the Howie Silbiger Show on the True Talk Radio Network. Get in on the conversation. Call 1-877-669-1292.
I'm Howie Silbiger, and welcome to Howie Silbiger's show, Israel Under Attack. A show that I really didn't want to do. A show that I really didn't think I would have to do, ever. But here we are. Now, I don't have to go over the graphic details about what happened in Israel over the last couple of days. We're all very well aware of the horrific attack on Israeli citizens. We're all very aware of how the Arab Nazis came into Israel and murdered men, women, and children indiscriminately for the sole reason that they were Jewish. There was no politics involved in this. And this being a political show, and I've done politics a very long time, we have to understand that politics had nothing to do with this attack. This was an attack on Jews on a holiday. This was not an attack because Israel's an occupier. This was not an attack because Israel provoked the Arabs in some imaginary way. This was an attack on people who were Jewish solely because they were Jewish. People were pulled out of their homes and shot because they were Jewish. This kind of attack is unprecedented. The last time something like this happened, well, I guess it is precedented, because the last time something happened like this many Jews killed in one day, was during Nazism. This was a Nazi attack on the Jewish people. Now, I'm not going to get very political tonight. We'll leave politics for another night. We'll leave politics for when politics are important. Right now, politics are not important. What is important right now is to understand that we have to use the proper terminology when we're speaking about this event. Because there are people out there who support the murder of hundreds of Jews. Thousands of people showed up to rallies right across North America today, yelling in support of Hamas, standing in support of the Arab Nazi movement, standing in support of spilled Jewish blood, standing in support of murdered Jews. There's no politics in that. We can't talk about politics. It's inappropriate to talk about politics right now. Israel will do what they have to do to not retaliate, to defend themselves and defend the Jewish people. The governments of foreigners who are in Israel are scrambling now to catch up. The Canadian embassy is closed. They were closed over the weekend, and they'll be closed for Thanksgiving, apparently, as I've seen some posts. And the world has to stand up. And the world has to support Israel right now. And we're starting to see the world support. But when the world supports Israel, we have to understand that that's very, 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 and I use the word very, very many times, that is extremely short-termed. Because as Israel goes into Gaza, which they will have to, there are hostages that have to be rescued or repatriated, because they're hostages. Who knows what's going to happen to them or what's currently happening to them? As they go into Gaza, the Arab propaganda machine is going to go into full force. And the mostly anti-Israel media, who currently is in support of Israel, this was a major, major attack on the Jewish state, major attack on the Jewish people. They're currently on Israel's side, but that's going to change. We know that's going to change. We know the playbook. The playbook is not new. This is an old playbook. Where right now we have to stand behind the Israelis because the Israelis are suffering. Right now, how could you not stand behind a country where terrorists infiltrated and killed hundreds of people indiscriminately in the street? Went house to house, murdering people? There's one horrific video. I'm not going to share any of these videos with you. I have them all, but I'm not going to share any of them with you. I'm going to spare you the post-traumatic stress of having to watch these videos, which are horrific. But there's one video that stood out for me, and it's not a video of somebody murdered. A family was taken hostage, and a little boy, must have been 4 or 5 years old, was thrown into a pit with a bunch of Arab kids. And the Arab kids weren't yelling Zionist. They weren't yelling, let go of my land. They weren't yelling, you're an occupier. They were yelling, filthy Jew. And as the kid cried for his mother, the Arab kids were mocking him. And these Arab kids were no older than 5 or 6 years old. And they were mocking him, saying, oh, look, the filthy Jew is begging for his mommy. Filthy Jew. Not Zionist. Not occupier. Not colonialist. Filthy Jew. And no truth is ever spoken more truer than the words that come out of children's mouths. Children don't know propaganda. They don't understand propaganda. They understand what is taught to them. And these young little Arab kids were taught that this was a filthy Jew who was subhuman. Now, it's no great surprise to me, or shouldn't be a great surprise to anybody, that the Arabs took Nazi tactics and committed a Nazi attack on the Jewish people. And I don't often use the term Nazi when I describe attacks on Jews. Normally I call it terrorism. Normally I'll call it some kind of terrorist attack. I'm using the term Nazi on purpose because the barbaric attacks, beheading, shooting, killing children in front of their parents, killing parents in front of their children, raping, the barbarism that was shown in the last couple of days was learned. It's not inherent. Human beings don't act like this. Creations of God don't act like this. This was learned. And this was learned and passed on from generation to generation. We have to remember that in the 1940s, during World War II, late 1930s to early 1940s, Hajj al-Husseini, who was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, was an ally of Hitler. He worked for Hitler. He ran the SS, Waffen-SS in the Middle East. And he trained the first wave of Arabs who attacked Israel. It's not surprising. It's not mind-blowing that the Arabs would have used Nazi tactics to attack the Jews. What is mind-blowing is that thousands and thousands and thousands of people turned up at protests all across North America today, celebrating the death of Jews. What is mind-blowing is that as we sit and we mourn the deaths of hundreds of our brethren, of our brothers and sisters and cousins and uncles and aunts in Israel, as we sit and we mourn their deaths, and as we worry about our brothers and sisters and children who are taken hostage and are being held in Gaza, there are people celebrating, people thrilled that Jewish blood was spilt and that Jews are currently being held captive. That's what's mind-blowing. Is that the same people, the same organizations that cry and scream for human rights and scream that Israel's a violator of human rights and that Israel is continuously committing war crimes, are sponsoring events supporting the celebration of the murder of Jews. What's mind-blowing is that the people who scream and yell and rant and post up on social media all the time about human rights and how Israel's an oppressor and a colonialist are sitting silently with no condemnation, no comment. Silence is acceptance. They're sitting, not saying a word. Nothing. Silence. Because Jewish life doesn't matter. And that's really all it comes down to, is that Jewish life doesn't matter. Jews are expendable. For millenniums, Jews have been expendable. And when Jews defend themselves, when Israel defends itself, when Jews defend themselves, we'll be condemned right and left. The world will yell and scream that the Jews are acting just like the Nazis. I have never been a big advocate of random violence, of retaliation. That's not my thing. But this is not retaliation. What Israel has to do is not retaliation. It's self-defense. It's defending the Jewish state. It's defending the Jewish people. And it must be done. They must wipe out Hamas, no matter what it takes. They must wipe out the mullahs in Iran who helped coordinate this attack and who have been coordinating attacks on Israel for years. They must wipe out their enemies and make the Middle East a much better place, a much stronger place, and a much safer place for everyone. This is what must happen. It's time for us to stop being mealy-mouthed about this. It's time for the Jews around the world, regardless of what your political leanings are, and I really don't care what they are. It's irrelevant to me. It's time for Jews to be clear in their message that Jewish life is not free, and that Jewish life is valuable, and that Jewish life will be protected at all costs. And that if you take a Jewish life because they are Jewish, if you as a country, or whatever Gaza is, if you take a Jewish life solely because they are Jewish, then there's a price to pay for that. And the world has to understand that Jews are no longer the people that are going to be pushed around. Jews are no longer the people that are going to be shoved into ovens. Jews are no longer the people who are going to be shoved into gas chambers. We're not going to turn our cheek. We're not going to turn our backs and say tomorrow will be a better day. We'll fight for our survival. And we have to be not ashamed, not afraid to say that. We have to stop building moats and fortifying our buildings. And we have to start saying, we have a right to exist as Jews. We have the right to live in peace as Jews. And we will do what we have to do in order to survive, as the Jewish people have done for centuries. Benjamin Netanyahu gave a great speech where he said, just like the Maccabees, and just like Yeshua ben Nun, the Jewish people will stand and defend themselves, their country, their land, and their people from any existential threat. If you want to weigh in on this, you could feel free to call in. 1-877-669-1292 is the number to call. If you want to get in on the conversation, you could talk to me. 1-877-669-1292. It's time. It's time that we stop being afraid. It's time that we start being the strong nation that we are. Now, I've been sending this message. I've been talking about this for years. I've been doing this show for over 20 years. And in that time, I've had the same message over and over and over again. that every time we say, well, what about the other side? Every time we say, well, maybe we should be compassionate to our enemies. Every time we back up, every time we stop, every time we hold ourselves back from defending Israel and from defending the Jewish people, every time we do this, we are sending the message that we are weak people. We are divided and weak. And every time we condemn people who speak out, condemn people, call them radicals, call them crazies, people who speak out and say we must defend ourselves, that we must stand and we must fight and we must be there, we must be present, and we must say that never again means something. Every time we call people who say that radical, we're empowering our enemies. We're telling our enemies that the tough Jews, the Jews that stand up, the Jews that fight, are not the mainstream. The mainstream Jews are peace-loving people. Of course we are. We all want peace. Even the ones who want to get up and fight want peace. But we have to understand, and the ones who get up and want to fight have to understand and do understand, that there's a time for peace and there's a time for fighting. And for the last 20 years, at least 20 years, on university campuses across North America, it was time for fighting, and we stood with peace. And for the last 20 years or so, rockets were raining in on the heads of people living in Sderot. And nobody really gave a damn. People living in Sderot. There are children who grew up in Sderot. There are adults in Sderot who never knew a normal childhood, who were living in bomb shelters for the last 20-odd years because rockets were raining on their heads. So nobody should be shocked that Hamas attacked. Nobody should be shocked that Hamas committed Nazi atrocities on Jewish people. It's not shocking. It's revolting. It's horrific, but it's not shocking. It's time. It's time for the Jewish people to stand up, to be counted, to stand up and say, enough is enough. It's time for us to say, there is no conversation if the words colonialists start the conversation. There's no conversation if the words oppression start the conversation. There's no conversation at all. There's no right wing and left wing anymore. Naftali Bennett said it today, and I agree with him 100%. There's no right wing or left wing anymore. Now it's Jews versus Jew haters. Jews versus Nazis. And the same way that you would have a disdain for a Nazi, we just saw a Nazi stand up and get applauded by the Canadian government. The same vile, disgusting feeling you had when the Canadian government applauded a Nazi in Parliament should be magnified, should be 10 times when we look at the Arab Nazis that committed this atrocity on Jewish people solely because they were Jewish. I can't say it more clearly. I can't speak any clearer. This was a Nazi attack. There was no political gain for this. There was no way that the Arabs thought there was any political gain. The only purpose of this attack today and yesterday and 2 days ago, the only purpose of this Hamas attack was to murder Jews. We can't let Nazism take over. We can't let Nazi supporters get away with supporting Nazism. We must stand up. We must face them. We must confront them, and we must defeat them. Defeat them on the campuses. Defeat them on the ground. Defeat them in Israel. Do whatever we have to do to defeat the Nazis. Because if you let Nazis run wild, and you let Nazis win, we know what the end result is. We've seen it. We've been there. We've done that. And we're not interested in doing it again. Please. I can't. I have to beg you, please. Be safe. Please. Be vigilant. Please don't ignore your people. Please stand up. And fight. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to stand up and fight. We got a couple of messages on Facebook I want to share with you. I stand and pray with Israel. It's the first one. Next one. It's also time that countries like Canada and the U.S. give the mullahs of Iran, giving those mullahs of Iran millions of dollars on humanitarian grounds. What a joke. They are using our monies to buy weapons for Hamas and other terrorist groups. Iran's also supporting Russia against Ukraine. Jews have a right to live in peace and go to a concert without being killed or taken hostage. They burned women, children, elderly, some Holocaust survivors who had to endure this nightmare. I don't want to hear from all the progressives that when Israel retaliates to protect their country and citizens, that Israel becomes the aggressor. Never again. Thank you, Sharon, for writing that. We must use the right terminology. There's no retaliation. I know Bibi Netanyahu says that we're going to get our vengeance, but there's really no retaliation. It's not retaliation what Israel's going to do. And words matter, and we have to use words properly. There is no retaliation. It's self-defense. Once the Nazis rear their heads and show that this is not a political fight, this is a religious fight, which I've been saying for years, by the way, but this is a religious fight. And today, and the attacks, this attack from Hamas shows that it's a religious fight, not a political fight. If this was a land war, this would have been settled years ago. This is not a land war. This is a religious war. And the religious war stems from, and this is, I mean, if you listen to the show for a while, you'll know. The religious war stems from the Quran saying that anytime there was a caliphate on any land, that land becomes Islamic forever. And because the Ottoman Empire was an Islamic caliphate and occupied what is currently Israel, the radical Muslims believe that this is holy Islamic land, and nobody else but Islamic people could run a country on this land. So it doesn't matter how many peace agreements that you're going to have with Muslims, these Arab Muslims. It doesn't matter how many times you're going to sign a deal with them. The end result is it's against their religion to have peace with Israel. And we saw the results of that when Yasser Arafat walked away from a deal offering him Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine and 90% of the land that he asked for. The only thing Israel wanted in return was recognition of the Jewish state. And he couldn't recognize the Jewish state simply because it's against his religion. And that's what's going on. It's a religious war. So stop the fallacy. Stop living in the propaganda created by the Arab League. Stop pretending that this is anything but Jews should not have self-determination. Jews should not be strong. And Jewish life is worthless. This is what this is all about. And when someone tells you, I don't hate Jews, I hate Zionists, it's baloney. It's a baloney. It's a shield. It is important to use words properly. And if you're progressive, that's fine. I mean, whatever. If you stand and support Hamas and support this Nazi attack against Jews, then you're a vile, disgusting human being. I'm Howie Silbiger. Thank you so much for joining me. I will be back again tomorrow, right here on the True Talk Radio Network.